Joining us for this segment is State Representative Alyson Sullivan, representing the 7th Plymouth District. Um, I believe that district is Whitman, Abington, and East Bridgewater. Representative, good to see and talk to you again.
Hi, Kevin. Good to see you and talk to you as well.
First conversation of 2021. How did you get through the holidays, and how have things been treating you since being sworn in earlier this month?
I think the holidays were tough on everyone, especially because of COVID and us still being in the middle of a pandemic, a global pandemic at that, and having to minimize the get togethers for families and loved ones. I know our family felt the difference, along with many throughout the communities that I represent in the Commonwealth. So holidays were good, small, very quiet, not complaining too much there, but it was nice to be able to spend some time with my immediate family, get to see my niece and nephews. And swearing in was right around that corner, and we were able to do it through a Zoom call. I think it was the Google meetings we used for our swearing in, so it was definitely interesting, to say the least.
It hasn't escaped me that what's changed this year from your swearing in is you have a new speaker. What's that like now? You've gone from Speaker DeLeo to Speaker Mariano.
It's only been a couple of weeks into the new session. Granted, Speaker Mariano was elected at the end of last session, and then again in this session. He seems to be very much an open door policy from what I'm hearing. Unfortunately, speaking, we're not physically in the State House still, so it's more of maybe an open Zoom or an open email type of policy when dealing with priorities across our own agendas. So he seems to be that he's willing and ready to work across aisles, across party lines, and to really hit some issues this coming session. It'll be exciting to see a new speaker. Speaker DeLeo, he was there for umpteen years, and to have new leadership, it'll be interesting to see what changes will be in place going forward.
How does it feel to be starting your second term? How does it feel?
It feels great. I even though we had the global pandemic, my second half of my first term and really changing how our office works. And we really, really adapted, Curtis and I, and Curtis did a great job in 2020, making sure that we were accessible even in a remote type of setting. Um, but it's very exciting, being able to be in this position and help people and really make a difference in the communities I represent and across the Commonwealth is something that is very hard to describe emotionally.
I think I've asked you this before, and I'll ask you it again. How important is it as an elected official to have somebody who is in charge of what goes on in your office and is kind of a point person like Curtis is?
hmm I mean, it's critically important, especially in a remote setting, to have somebody to um, filter calls in the sense of being able to handle some calls that might be more of a standard type of answer and be able to make sure that issues are being addressed at a very efficient time. I'm very blessed, along with a lot of my colleagues, to have great staffers in our office. And Curtis, of course, is a staffer of one in our office. And he does probably the work of seven people and does it well and does it without ever complaining. And he enjoys what he does. He enjoys being able to speak with constituents in our district. And even during the pandemic, we saw cases outside of our quote unquote district that we helped individuals obtain unemployment payments and be able to connect them to the right resources. Because at the end of the day, everyone in this Commonwealth is considered one of my constituents. And so we never shut our doors or turned our back to anybody. And I commend Curtis for having that same mindset going through 2020 and the pandemic that we saw.
How does your vision change from last March, where it was when you tried to plan ahead, there were so many unknowns and so many uncertainties, to here we are at the beginning of 2021. There's a lot of hope on the horizon because of vaccines and knowing that
Mhm.
maybe we're going to actually see the light of day eventually?
Yeah, I mean, in March of 2020, I think a lot of people hoped that it would be a, couple of weeks shutdown, a very short time, short period, confinement in the sense of being able to get back to our normal day lives, right? And here we are in January 2021, and some people still haven't been able to go back to their quote unquote normal lives. Um, so I think the hope is, the lights at the end of the tunnel, that there is light shining through in the sense that we do have a vaccine that's been able to come out. We've been able to administer those vaccines to our first responders here in the communities and other uh, people within that phase one, right? And being able to take that step into hopefully having that light come sooner than later, and getting back to some normalcy. Curtis and I were able to attend a Girl Scout meeting. I believe it was in November, December of 2020. And the girls there, they were great, great group of girls here in Abington, and they were very much concerned with when they can get back to school. They miss being in school, and I hear that from a lot of school age children, and it's an issue that we need to kind of look at and move forward in hopes that we can get these children back into a full in school in person learning.
Are you as a legislator, an elected official, satisfied with how things have been progressing, knowing that they're already kind of looking at mass inoculations, whether they're going to use Gillette Stadium or they're going to use Fenway Park? How do you feel about the whole process?
Obviously, like everybody else, you hoped and wished that it would be a quicker, smoother process. But of course, we're all human, right? And this is the first time that a lot of people are dealing with something to this magnitude. I think the administration is doing the best that they can. Nobody's perfect, and we can all critique in the sense of standing where we're standing and being able to say this should have been done differently. I think it's a great improvement in the sense of having Gillette Stadium and Fenway Park be open up to a mass vaccination site. I think that's very important. I think the administration can't also lose sight with the vaccines to also have testing available. And what I've seen is a lot of issues with people unable to receive testing or adequate testing here in our communities or in the South Shore area. Massasoit was one of the kind of key places to be able to get tested, and they've been closed now for I think it's been about 3 to 4 weeks. So the nearest I think site for our communities is Randolph, and that's the only one that you don't need an appointment for or a doctor's authorization. And I think we need to have way more than just one site for these communities. I think it's important, especially when the administration urges everybody to get tested as often as they can, in the sense if they're exposed to anyone positive or if they're showing any type of symptoms under the COVID symptom list. So I think it's important that we don't lose sight of having those testing available during the vaccination process.
If you're just tuning in, we are speaking with State Representative Alyson Sullivan, representing the 7th Plymouth District, and it's great to have regular conversations with the representative. And knowing that's the start of a new legislative session, the fun begins. This is your second go around as far as how the process goes. Where do you stand as far as whether you're going to be supporting bills, signing on the bills, or crafting your own legislation to gain support and submit?
Prior to a pandemic in 2020 and in the bill filing session of 2021, we'd already have bills filed and co-sponsored at this point. However, we've had an extension to be able to get about an extra month to file legislation. So it's been, I think, a slow go for a lot of people in the sense of filing. We've been where it's usually accessible, where you can meet with colleagues or advocacy programs and or House Counsel to be able to draft up legislation. This year, it's a little bit different when they understood the difficulties and the barriers that we would be facing. So they gave us extra time to file and co-sponsor legislation. I intend to refile legislation that I filed 2 years ago. I also intend to file some new legislation as well. Some of the key topic points that I'm going to be looking at this legislative session is domestic violence and sexual assaults type of legislation and how we can improve how we benefit our community around those areas.
Have you had a chance to look for numbers or information as to how domestic violence, how that issue escalated, or how the numbers were during a pandemic? Is that what's leading part of your push for this measure?
So a lot of my push is from my own personal experience and working now in my position and seeing the different shortfalls, if you may, boundaries that may come up, inabilities of certain resources, just because of an array of reasons. However, during a pandemic, the numbers were down. Reporting of domestic violence, reporting of sexual assaults were down, and I believe it wasn't because it wasn't happening, and most of us would be hopeful of that. It's because of survivors of domestic violence didn't feel safe enough to leave a violent home or report a violent incident or be able to seek help or shelter because it was not available during this pandemic. So seeing what we could have done differently now in 2021, looking back in 2020, and what we could have done as a Commonwealth, as a legislative body, and also an administration, to go forward and improve on that, so we don't have those type of shortfalls again.
What other legislation are you looking to champion this time around?
So another piece of legislation that has been brought to my attention is voter identification. We're gonna be drafting up legislation that would surround a form of voter identification when you go to the polls to vote. I know that with talking with people that are, opposed it or in support of it, some of the issues is around if people can't afford to get an ID, what do we do in those situations? And I think, we can find ways, whether it be through the town halls in the communities or through the registry, to provide a free, if not low cost identification for voting purposes. And that would alleviate some issues around voter fraud or identity fraud in the voting process.
Yeah, it's been. I've been hearing. It's interesting that this is something you're bringing forth because looking at the last election, looking at previous elections, social media is one of those things that can be the devil in the detail. Where you have people who are amazed that maybe someone isn't showing an idea, not that it's not part of the process. So I like the idea that this is something that you're hoping will will gain support and become law.
Mhm. I think our towns did an amazing job in
Yeah.
here in the Commonwealth, and they do an amazing job. And this is not an insult to their jobs and how they conduct their voting areas, right? I think the toll workers, the voting workers, they did a great job, right? I think it's just to bring a peace of mind to a lot of people. I mean, you need an ID for everything you probably do, in the sense of even going down to see a movie. If you're going to see an R-rated movie, you need to show an ID. Buying cigarettes, buying alcohol, renting a car, renting a hotel room. I mean, all of the things that you need to do in life. I think with voting, we need to also have an identification process.
Again, we're speaking with State Representative Alyson Sullivan as we have a few more minutes speaking with her. I don't know if you did it 2 years ago when you were sworn in your first time. I don't know if you have done it this time, but have you set any kind of legislative goals for yourself where maybe they're just like little personal benchmarks within you, like, oh, I want to make sure that I do this, this, and this, and that I'm able to have this many coffee hours. Every legislator is different.
Mhm.
Have you done such a thing as far as setting goals?
So I know Curtis and I, we've been trying to discuss what it will look like in 2021 if we're still in a sense of social distancing, working from home, what it's going to look like for our office hours. Unfortunately, in 2020, not only did a pandemic hit, but I was also involved in a motorcycle crash, and which caused me to have a broken ankle and sitting on the couch for several weeks. So I wasn't able to do the same things that I would normally be able to do in a normal everyday pre-pandemic or anything else. So we're trying to find ways to be more accessible. I know we've been accessible in the sense of answering emails, answering phone calls, answering text messages, answering Facebook messages, social media, but being able to have, whether it be a Zoom, a monthly Zoom meeting for each town where people can come in and join in and ask questions, or if they have concerns or issues. I know one of my priorities is to make sure we're more available in that sense, right, to the constituents. I also think that this year it's going to be very important for me to connect with the different town leaderships and to make sure we're having active conversations leading up to a budget debate or different issues here in the district in facing each independent town. So that's definitely another thing that I think is very important that we continue.
As we wrap up, I want to give you an opportunity. Anything we haven't touched upon during our conversation, but you at least want to take a moment to kind of touch upon?
Yeah, so I do just want to say a quick shout out to Bemis Drug and the Cox family. It's very sad that they are closing their doors for good. It's my understanding that it's been in the Cox family since I believe 1960s, and prior to that, I believe it was 1901 that it's been a Bemis Drug. So to say Bemis Drug has been a staple in the community of Abington is an understatement, and they will be greatly, greatly missed. I do want to wish, Bill Cox and his family, especially Bill, a happy retirement. It's well deserved. He's done a lot for our community, and I just want to say thank you.
I know it's interesting these tough times that we're going through now. Not to say that what Bemis has gone through has anything to do with COVID, but knowing that we've seen a lot of change, a lot of turnover in the past year, Bemis being the
Yep.
latest one, and knowing that there are restaurants also that have closed their doors because of the pandemic specifically. It's
Oh
tough.
yeah, it's sad to see some of the restaurants that have been closed for good. It's also been very troubling hearing from restaurant owners and the employees about the frustrating issues going around the pandemic and the shutdowns and how it's affected them. So my heart goes out to all of them, and hopes that that light is so close at the end of the tunnel that we can go back to our old normal and restaurants can go back to full speed and be able to serve the communities that they represent.
And if your constituents want to reach out to you, your office, how can they do
Yep.
that?
The best way at this point right now for us is email is the most effective way to get in contact with us. And that my email is ALYSON, so Allison.Sullivan, SULLIVAN at mahouse.gov. I also respond to social media messages as well, if that's another way that people want to get in contact with me.
Representative, as always, we thank you for joining us and talking about some of the things that you're working on and your work within your district and up at the State House.
Thank you, Kevin.